Hi, my name is Alex Gazzano and I'm the events coordinator here at the Clearwater Historical Society. Today we'll be having Ken Breslauer. He'll be speaking about Florida Roadside Attractions history. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you.
Be here today. I always admire organizations that are all volunteer, being a volunteer speaker, and it's really great to be here. I really admire what you've done here, and the museum's awesome. Thank you, Alex, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So today I'm going to talk about Florida Roadside Attractions history, and it's based on my book, Florida Roadside Attractions History, the complete guide to Florida tourism attractions before Disney. Now, it's hard to believe this is the 50th anniversary of Disney World. It seems like it just opened. But historians tend to use the opening of Disney World in Florida as sort of this landmark occasion that kind of destroyed the tourism industry, especially the smaller mom-and-pop attractions. But I think that's kind of an unfair criticism. There are a lot of factors that went into what happened to these smaller Florida roadside attractions. Now, it's kind of sobering. 87% of Florida's attractions that were founded before Disney are now out of business, which is amazing when you think about it. But why did this happen? Again, people tend to blame Disney, but to me, this is a classic quote that really explains what happened to the Florida tourism industry. Charles Corral said, "Thanks to the interstate highway system, it is now possible to travel across the country from coast to coast without seeing anything." And really, if you look at how the highway system evolved in Florida, we went from US 1 and US 27, the Orange Blossom Trail, to US 19, but then it became I-95, I-75, I-4, the Suncoast Parkway. So tourists now have a destination in mind. It's not a road trip. We're going to Disney, we're going to wherever. It's not an adventure anymore like it used to be. Of course, as I mentioned, these roads really changed the demographics of travel in Florida and across the country. The Florida Turnpike had a huge impact on tourism and small attractions when it opened. It opened in 1957, the first part of it, so it had a really big impact. So here's a picture of US 27, just south of Clermont, Florida. And in the distance, you can see the Citrus Tower, which was built in 56, 57. And when you were in the Citrus Tower, this is what you would see. This is a panoramic view. The whole purpose of the Citrus Tower was sort of this monument to the citrus industry. And this is what it looks like now from the Citrus Tower. So basically, the purpose of the Citrus Tower was for people to go up and see this panoramic view of all these beautiful orange groves. And now you see strip malls and gated communities. And that's sort of the story of Florida tourism in some respects. I really like these two photos. This is really nothing to do with attractions per se, but on the left is Pine Island near Fort Myers in the 20s. Same view in the 80s. 60 years. That's what's happened. So the value of land has been another reason these small attractions haven't been able to survive. It's just been too costly to operate, and usually the second generation wants to cash out on land values, which is understandable. So let's take a little trip through old Florida. The first stop, of course, is to have your picture with the state line sign. And then you go to the welcome station for your free glass of orange juice, which they still do, by the way. But at the time, in the 40s, 50s, early 60s, there was 8 welcome stations at various main entry points to Florida, from Highway 90 in Pensacola all the way to US 1 near Jacksonville. And now I believe there's only 2, I-75 and I-95. So, again, that's another big change in the demographics. I love this photo. This is one of the greatest photos I've ever found. Were your kids ever that happy traveling? No, I don't think so.
Not with 7 of us in the car, huh?
But it really is too good to be true, because here's a station wagon, you know, the family traveling, they have the suitcases on top, and there's a welcome station in the background. It's really a great photo. But again, it shows you how much traveling has changed now. So before Disney, which opened 50 years ago, there were really 5 attractions that dominated the industry. Silver Springs, which is now a state park, Cypress Gardens, which is now Legoland, Marine Studios, Marineland, which was just sold again. It's changed drastically. It's now the Dolphin Conservatory. Weeki Wachee, which is now a state park, and Bok Tower, which has always been owned by a nonprofit foundation. And if you've never been there, it's a fantastic place to go. So Silver Springs is the granddaddy of Florida attractions. A lot of people don't realize that before Disney, this was the biggest attraction in Florida. Nothing came close to Silver Springs. The glass bottom boats, of course, are an iconic part of Florida tourism. It became a state park in 2013, and they still have the glass bottom boats, but most of the other aspects of the attraction are pretty much gone. Again, the glass bottom boats. It had side attractions. The Ross Allen Reptile Institute was a legendary part of Silver Springs, and Ross Allen was one of the great Florida naturalists in our history. They had an antique car museum, a deer ranch, and interestingly enough, they had a totally separate attraction right next door called Paradise Park, which was just for blacks. It opened in 1949. Segregation was a big part of Florida, and most attractions did not allow African Americans to even walk through the gates. Silver Springs being one of them. But they wanted their money, so what do? So in 1949, they opened Paradise Park. You see it's the sign there, Paradise Park for Colored People, and it was the largest attraction of its kind in North America, exclusively for blacks. There's a great book that came out a few years ago by the University of Florida Press on the history of Paradise Park. It's amazing how many people don't even know about it, but it's really a fascinating part of Florida's tourism history. As the civil rights movement came and various laws were passed, it sort of got phased out in the mid-60s. So Cypress Gardens was probably number 2 behind Silver Springs. And in fact, probably in the 50s, maybe early 60s, Cypress Gardens was probably bigger than Silver Springs in terms of attendance. It's famous for its Southern Bells and its ski shows and so forth. It closed in 2003. It tried to reopen a couple times with an amusement park. It tried different things. And then it was purchased by Legoland. The garden part still exists, and it's actually a part of an agreement with the state of Florida for historic easement, so it will be preserved, but it's certainly not a key part of Legoland. Marineland opened in 1938 and was one of the first true marine attractions. This is a great photo taken probably early 60s. And Marineland is another classic case of now being off the beaten path. It was about 20 miles south of St. Augustine on A1A, which even to this day is somewhat of a desolate area. And when I-95 opened, it just killed the traffic there. And of course, then SeaWorld opened in the 70s. And so Marineland effectively closed in 2003. They demolished everything, and then they rebuilt it as the Marineland Dolphin Adventure, it's called. It's been sold several times. The Georgia Aquarium actually bought it for a while. So, but it's still going, but it's a much smaller attraction than it used to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about attractions that are in this immediate area. This is the Aquatarium that was on St. Pete Beach, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. Weeki Wachee, of course, is a legendary Florida attraction. The Spring of Mermaids opened in 1947. And it and Silver Springs were purchased in the late 1950s by ABC Television. And they did a lot of promotions, celebrity promotions. They did TV shows there and so forth. Elvis Presley visited Weeki Wachee, which was a big deal. But the mermaid show still exists to this day, even though it's a state park. Florida is the only state that actually employs mermaids and mermen, and it's still a good place to visit. A lot of the side attractions are gone, or pretty much all of them. They have a river cruise that they still have, but it's another classic Florida attraction, certainly. Sunken Gardens, St. Petersburg, is now owned by the city of St. Pete. It's been beautifully preserved. The building you see at the top there was the original entrance, and they just announced a couple weeks ago they have funding to restore that and return that as the original entrance. They had two other entrances. You see at the bottom. The one on the lower right, you may remember, was this big fake rock facade they made for a while. But it's a fantastic attraction, and if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. This has been in the news a lot lately. This is the Earl Gresh Wood Parade, which opened in the late 30s by Earl Gresh. If you don't know much about him, great history. He was a sportsman, a musician. His claim to fame was woodworking, his love for wood. His fishing lures are now worth a fortune if you find them. He made wooden purses, which are very collectible. But this, up until, I guess a few months ago, was the Melting Pot Restaurant. And I just drove by there, and it's a big for sale sign on it. And I guess we were just talking about that. Somebody supposedly has purchased it, and the rumor is it's going to be demolished. So who knows? It's not, I don't think it's been designated as a historic landmark. It should be. It's a beautiful building. It's been altered on the exterior quite a bit, but inside it's really impressive building. Marine Arena was a fairly small attraction located at Johns Pass. I don't know if any of you remember that. But probably the significance of it is that the contents of that attraction were pretty much was purchased and moved to the Aquatarium, which was a marine attraction on St. Pete Beach that was pretty popular in the 60s and 70s. It was like most of the other marine attractions at that time, dolphin shows and so forth. In the late 70s, when they were on the decline, they changed the name to Shark World to capitalize on the movie Jaws. But it didn't work out too well. It was closed in the late 70s, torn down, and is now, of course, a condo. A very early attraction, in fact, one of the first real early attractions in Pinellas County was the Alligator Farm, which was on 4th Street South. Alligators were the iconic thing to see at attractions at that time. There were a lot of alligator farms around Florida, still are. And this one was very popular at the time. It did close during World War II. The Florida Wild Animal Ranch was a classic Florida roadside attraction, operated from 37 to 59. It was more or less a zoo. Interesting little sidelight about that attraction is it was one of the largest manufacturers of alligator purses in the country in the 50s. They had quite a business going. In fact, really what helped them for a while was when Castro took over Cuba. Everyone talks about how the cigar export stopped. Well, the alligator purse export from Cuba was just as big as the cigar exports. So they capitalized on that, knowing that was going to happen. But they closed not long after that, and that property was offered to the city of St. Pete, and they refused to buy it, and now it's condominiums. What a surprise. Yeah. One of the classic attractions of this area, Tiki Gardens, and it has a fanatic following of collectors who are into Tiki culture, Polynesian culture. If you have anything from Tiki Gardens, this is worth a lot of money. It began as a gift shop, pretty much, the Byers family, and they acquired this beautiful property and made it into this little Polynesian paradise. They had bird shows. They had a restaurant, Trader Frank's, famous for all these different cocktails and so forth. A really, really fun attraction. it closed in '88, and it was acquired by the county, and they decided to use it for beach parking, which is fine, except they just demolished everything, leveled the property, and made no effort to save any of the vegetation or anything. They just it was really disappointing they did that. But it has really got a fanatical following. Eagle's Nest right here in Clearwater was a really major attraction. It was a seasonal attraction. It was only open during the winter months, and it had a Japanese tea house. So if you went there, then the admission was free. And during World War II, because of the anti-Japanese sentiment, it was called Eagle's Nest, even though it used both names throughout the period. But there was certainly a lot of anti-Japanese feelings during the war. It continued to operate on and off after World War II, and then it briefly changed its name to Marine Gardens, and then it closed, and of course it was developed for housing. There's an ad for the part of the attraction that was converted to development, housing, and so forth. It's a beautiful area, but it's like many attractions that feature tropical gardens and so forth. The property values just became so high, depending on where they were, that it's easy for us to be disappointed when they close. But the reality, the economic realities to the families that own them is, they need to get the value for them. Sarasota Jungle Gardens is another gardens attraction that still operates to this day and is still, independently owned. It's one of the last attractions of that type. It's a true old Florida attraction. It needs a little work. It's not quite up to date as most attractions. I hope it survives. I know a while back they were trying to convert to a nonprofit status so they could get funding more easier, but I don't think that's happened. But it's a really nice attraction. It's similar to Sunken Gardens, but it's really it's a lot of fun to go to. I recommend it. Florida Land was a very interesting attraction just south of Sarasota on US 41. What they did was they decided to just combine all the stereotypical themes of attractions. So it was a porpoise show. There was a Wild West town, Lexington territory. There was the Paddle Queen river cruise. There was alligator wrestling. They had a Seminole village there. I mean, it was just a mishmash of everything. And it never really caught on. They struggled. They opened, they closed, and they had different investors. And it closed in '71 and became condos. Busch Gardens should be mentioned here because, it's really one of the first true corporate theme parks. It originally was just a gardens for a PR stunt for the brewery, basically. But it continues today as a huge amusement park, as you know. But it really had humble beginnings, and it was well intentioned. It really was. It was free for years, and then it evolved into more of an amusement park. The brewery's long gone, so it's strictly an attraction. It's been sold many times since then. I listed here a few attractions from this area that are long gone. Caswell's Orchid Gardens. Let's see, Seville Peacock Farm, Parakeet Village, which was bizarre attraction. Sea-O-Rama at the Clearwater Marina was there for years, which was all it was just a display of taxidermy fish. My favorite all time, of course, is the guinea pig colony in Safety. Believe it or not. Weddings, Botanical Gardens. That actually is a nursery business, and I think it's still there. Fox Bower Dinosaur Wildlife. Have you ever seen the pink alligator on US 19? Just south of Wekiwachi? There's a giant pink alligator. That was the sign. It's still there. let's see, Monkey Town. Joe, you were asking me about that a while back. On US 19, there was this attraction called Monkey Town. It was also called Roaring Sea. It had two different names. And it operated from 65 to 73. Had very, very bad reputation for treatment of animals. Fort Dodge was basically a 6-gun territory that it didn't catch on at all. And Shell Land in Clearwater was very near Monkey Town and was basically very similar. Just a few other attractions to talk about. Long before some of us got into the gambling business, the casino business, you would drive down the Tamiami Trail and around Florida, you would see dozens and dozens of these. And they all looked about like that. And that's just a classic photo of one. We had some bizarre attractions in Florida too. This was Ocala Caverns, also called Uranium Valley. I have no reason why it was called Uranium Valley, but it was owned by a professional wrestler, and so he built this giant statue of himself at the entrance, and that operated for many years actually near Ocala. Dogland, one of my favorites, was on US 19 in Sheafland, and what it was a display of every AKC registered breed at that time. So you could go and just see any breed you wanted, and if you wanted one, then you could order one. So it sort of had a little retail component there, but that's long gone too. The Shell Factory still exists in North Fort Myers. I think that's one of the most beautiful buildings that ever was constructed as a roadside attraction. It's a beautiful facade. I don't know why, but it's still there, but it's all boarded up. And they just use this regular entrance. It's like a big warehouse now. But it's still there. It's a free attraction. It's this huge gift shop, and then they have some animal exhibits and so forth. But it's one of the survivors. Back in the 40s and 50s, it was the world's largest supplier of shellcraft supplies. Shellcraft is like a hobby that's almost disappeared now. But people don't realize in the 40s and 50s, it was a huge hobby, shellcraft. And they were the wholesale distributor of shellcraft supplies. McKee Jungle Gardens is a really interesting story because it's one of the first Tampa Guards to open as an attraction in Florida. It's on US 1. And in 1976, it closed. I-95 killed the traffic in that area. And it was about 80 acres, and a condo developer bought it. And they took about 60 acres immediately, demolished the gardens, and built the world's ugliest condos. And about 10 years later, a nonprofit formed to buy back the remaining, I guess it's maybe 15 acres, but which was actually the nicest 15 acres because it fronted US 1. And they did it, they got it back, and they have totally restored it as it was. It is a fantastic attraction.
I've been there the last couple of years.
They've done a great job with it. Obviously, it's not as big as it was, but even they have some historic buildings there, the gift shop, and they have the world's largest table, which is really cool, wooden table. But they had the gardens are just fantastic. I highly recommend it if you're in the Vero Beach area to go to that. It's really worth the trip. Rainbow Springs, Denellen, just another example of a state park. One of many state parks that was a privately owned attraction. And Florida is very fortunate to have one of the best land acquisition programs in the country. You can say what you want about our politicians, but the one thing Florida has done is allocate a tremendous amount of money to buying land conservation and buying historic easements and so forth. 6-gun territory, if you grew up during this period, this was the attraction. Everybody was infatuated with the Wild West, Gunsmoke and Bonanza at that time. And these Old West attractions were by far one of the most popular. It was located very near Silver Springs, so they kind of capitalized on the traffic going to Silver Springs. There was also Pioneer City in Davie, and Florida Land, I mentioned, had one, and Fort Dodge up on US 19. It was a pretty popular theme at that time. It is now six-gun shopping center. So, the favorite all-time entrance for any attraction in Florida is Gatorland, which still exists near Orlando. I guess technically it's in Kissimmee on the Orange Blossom Trail. Really good attraction. I recommend it. It began in 1949 as Snake Village, and they thought, you know, that might be turning off some people. So they decided, after a few other name changes, it became Gatorland, and probably one of the more successful old attractions that still exists. The entrance you see actually burned down about 10 years ago, and then they rebuilt it exactly like it was. It's really cool entrance.
Does the same family still own it?
The Godwin, yeah. This is what it looks like when it was opened, Snake Village. Just to show you how things change.
Wow.
I think the gator mouth is more appealing.
Yeah.
So just a few other things. You know, I've talked about roadside attractions, but you know, as us commercial archaeologists, as we're called, we study other things related to the roadsides. Gas stations, motels, restaurants, citrus stands, signs. There's all kinds of little funky things we like to preserve and talk about. Many of you know this. This is right up on US 19 near Weeki Wachee. Legendary nationally. It's like a mecca for us commercial archaeologists. It was a gas station, obviously. You know, I think Sinclair, obviously, but it's still open. It's a auto repair place. Very cool. I hope it's preserved. I don't know what condition it's in. There's some photos you can see online of it being constructed. I don't know what method they used, but hopefully it's going to be around for a while. Stuckey's. If you traveled in the 60s and 70s, this was. I mean, you go to an interstate highway exit in the middle of nowhere, there would be a Stuckey's there. And that was their whole method of operation was Mr. Stuckey decided to buy property at every, not every interchange, but, interchanges, even in the middle of nowhere, because, he knew that there would be demand for that, so gas and food and gifts and so forth. The Stuckey still exists. I don't know of any standalone Stuckey's. Now in Vero Beach, there's a gas station that's part Stuckey's, and you go in there and they sell Stuckey's, candies and stuff like that. But it's not a restaurant or anything. So the name still exists. I think maybe in Georgia there's some standalone Stuckey's, but they're pretty much gone. This is a legendary motel that was in Orlando on Orange Blossom Trail, and it operated until 1974. It was a chain. There are 5 of them, and 3 still exist. There's one in Kentucky, and the other 2 are out west. I think one's in Arizona. But their slogan was "Sleep in a Teepee," and it's kind of cute. I mean, it's a really kid saw that. So, we got to stay there. So it was a really cool place. It was demolished and I believe was replaced by one of those generic Holiday Inns. And I love different roadside signs and buildings and so forth. And this is a restaurant that was in Bonita Springs called the Orange Dome, and it's just a great example of some of the roadside architecture that Florida once had. You don't see too much of that anymore. There was a giant orange ring on US 27, and that just closed a few years ago. So one of many great things on our state. So if you ever have the chance to travel around, take the back roads. Don't take the interstates, and you'll see a lot of cool things. And that concludes my presentation.